Hi, welcome to this little section on what I'll call Wi-Fi security best practices. This is a much more practical lecture where I just give you a few hints on best ways to configure a wireless network, just, so you're doing it smartly. So let's get into it. So to start with, I just want to say that basic security for your Wi-Fi network is fairly simple, especially your home network. In fact, it's dirt simple for your home network. But here are some recommendations and a little bit of discussion about why I make those recommendations. Because the first thing you have to think about when you're configuring a Wi-Fi network is your choice of the SSID. And it's important to note that the SSID is not a secret. Your access point broadcasts it once a second to anyone within radio range. So it doesn't matter what it is, but remember that it's public. Anybody can see that. So just keep that in mind. And there might be some SSIDs that might be bad ideas. You might not want to use your name or your address or your phone number. Some people do. I don't know why. Because you're basically broadcasting this to anyone within radio range. So when you think about it, don't put anything in your SSID that you wouldn't put on a sign on the front of your house, because you have about the same visibility, actually. But it's not a secret. So in the end, it really doesn't matter what you call it. This is something I think is kind of funny. People in apartment buildings sometimes get passive-aggressive with their SSIDs, I'll call it. So for example, this one here is someone who set their SSID to say, turn down your music, because they're trying to send a note to their neighbor that says, your music's too loud, you're annoying me. But they don't want to go address it, right? Like they don't want to go knock on their door and say, hey, can you turn down your music? So instead they just change their wireless network to say, turn down your music. Passive aggressive. It's kind of funny. There's people do even crazier stuff with their SSIDs than this. I just think it's kind of funny and interesting. All right. So when you're configuring encryption on your wireless network, for home, it's pretty straightforward. Just use WPA2 with a pre-shared key. Some really old hardware won't support it, but this rarely comes up anymore. Almost everything now supports WPA2. You'd have to have some pretty old stuff, probably 2001, 2002-ish, that wouldn't support WPA2. I haven't seen something that doesn't support WPA2 in quite a while. I remember hearing that for a long time, like the Nintendo Wii didn't support it. And so all these people had their home networks configured insecurely just because they had a Wii. But I think even that has been fixed now. But what should you use as your password? Well, you need to avoid brute forcing. So you don't want to pick something simple. And I recommend you use a passphrase. So there's not much of a limit on the size of a WPA2 password/passphrase. So just use a passphrase with 6 to 8 randomly chosen words. Don't use a quote from a book or a movie or something like that. Quotes are surprisingly easy to find because they're quotes. It's just something you could add to a dictionary to check. But if it's just 6 random or even semi-random words, you're going to be just fine. No one's going to brute force that. Now, the downside of this configuration, if you do this at home, WPA2 with a pre-shared key and a 6 to 8 word, passphrase, is that guests need to enter your password in order to get on your network. If you have someone come over to the house to visit or someone stay with you or something like that, and that's kind of a hassle for 2 reasons. The first is they have to type it in, and the second is you have to find it, because you may have already forgotten it. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Okay, what about for work? Like a large enterprise when they're configuring their network. Well, many companies use WPA2 Enterprise, which is different from pre-shared key in that it's not a common password for everyone. Instead, you can authenticate in more complicated ways. The most common way is a username and password. Sometimes you can configure it to use smart cards that are plugged into computers, et cetera, but usernames and passwords are the most common. The downside of this is that guests can't authenticate. Because someone comes in for a visit, they don't have a username or password for the network, they can't log in. So you have to set up some sort of complicated guest access system, depending on what sort of organization you are. Another issue I want to point out, and this is something you see when you actually use one of these, is that it's really actually painful to configure WPA2 Enterprise properly on the client side. It'd be okay if it was just complicated to configure the network, but configuring individual computers to connect and use the username and password is not very smooth, I'll say. And I'm not exactly sure for the reason for that, but it's surprisingly painful. So if you're going to make users do it themselves, you're going to have problems. They're going to be coming into your help desk all the time because they can't figure out how to configure it. So that's just something to think about. Now, I want to mention what I call the guest problem, and I alluded to this before, and that's that having guests use your Wi-Fi network is potentially problematic. You normally want to allow them to get online or whatever else, but it can be a hassle. And so some people just say, well, I'll just leave my network open so anybody can connect and it's easy. Well, that's kind of a security nightmare because then nothing's encrypted. But making them type in a password, especially a good one that's kind of long, is annoying. They don't really like to do it, and you have to remember what it is. People always forget because, they set it up, they get all their computers on the network, and then 6 months later, someone comes for a visit and nobody remembers what the password is. Another issue is, what if you want to revoke their access later? What if someone comes to visit my house and I let them use my Wi-Fi, but I didn't really mean to say you can use it for all eternity. I meant, you can use it today. Well, the only way for me to do that would be to change the password and then reconfigure every computer in my house. So it's kind of confusing. Dealing with guests is not easy. Managing them on a WPA enterprise network is even more annoying because if you have a guest who comes to your company or your organization and they need to get online, well, you have to create a temporary account for them in the system just so that they can have a username and password to log in. Then you have to remember to disable the account, and there's usually some procedure for creating the guest account. The whole thing just becomes a nightmare, and all you really have is somebody who wants to check their email while they're visiting you for a meeting. So it's just the guest problem is a real issue in figuring out how to properly configure wireless networks. I want to talk through what I'll call Wi-Fi security myths. These are things that people traditionally used to do because they thought it was good security, or sometimes still do because they think it's good security, when in reality it doesn't really help much with security. The first is MAC address authentication. And the idea here was, I'm going to have a list of stations, computers or whatever, that I want to allow on my network, and I'm only going to allow those MAC addresses, the MAC address, to connect. Okay. So I make a list of the MAC addresses of all the machines I want to allow to connect, and I tell my access points basically during the authentication phase, when they send an authentication frame, if that authentication frame doesn't come from a MAC address that I recognize, then say no, don't allow them in. Okay, the concept sounds okay, but the problem is pretty simple, and that's that MAC addresses can be sniffed and spoofed. Remember, this is wireless, and there's no authentication on those portions of the packets. So if I know if I know that your machine has a MAC address, in fact, I can tell that just by sniffing traffic that you're sending, I can get your MAC address. I can send packets pretending to be from your MAC address, and I can see the replies. So I can pretend to be you, and the system will let me on without any trouble. Now, it may prevent casual Wi-Fi theft, but that's about it. I don't see many organizations still using this. The most common application of MAC address authentication is actually at airports. I see it there all the time. You'll be at an airport that doesn't have free Wi-Fi, they have pay Wi-Fi, right? And you connect, and it's like, enter your credit card and pay us $10 and you can get online for the day. Well, how do they remember that it's you who paid the $10 and not somebody else? Well, they make a MAC address list. So when you pay, they check your MAC address and they add it to a list that says, okay, this MAC address is allowed to connect to the internet for 24 hours. So that's commonly used there. But MAC addresses can be faked. So if someone really wanted to, if you're at an airport and they've done this, where you pay your $10, well, if you change your MAC address to the MAC address of somebody who already paid, well, the access point will let you connect to the internet because it can't tell the difference between you and the other person. The only problem there is that if both of you are trying to access the same access point at the same time with the same MAC address, the whole thing will go crazy because the access point will get confused about who it's talking to and the state, and the whole thing just kind of falls apart. But it's just an interesting thing to know that in some cases this is still used. Now, another Wi-Fi security myth is SSID hiding. So people said, well, okay, I don't want to send broadcast frames. I don't want to advertise my wireless network. That way people won't see it. They won't know it's there. And if attackers can't see it, then they won't hack it, was kind of the idea. And this means you only allow people to connect if they know the SSID. Well, the only problem there is that a normal client, when they want to connect to the SSID, they send a probe request frame that's named. So if they want to connect to hidden SSID, they send a probe request frame named and says, is anyone here called hidden SSID? And the access point replies and says, yes, I am. And then they allow the connection. Well, an attacker who's listening to traffic would see the request for the name hidden SSID and the reply that, yes, I'm that. So the attacker could do the exact same thing next. Hey, I want to connect to that, and I want to connect to hidden SSID. And so just configuring your access point to not send broadcast frames doesn't fundamentally increase security. But it could be used to prevent casual Wi-Fi theft. Someone who just happens to be there and opens up their machine real quick to see if there's an open access point, doesn't see one, okay, they move on. But as a fundamental security thing, it's not really going to do much for you. So a few other random things about configuring security on Wi-Fi, particularly for your home network. Always change your router's admin password. First, you don't want anyone on your network to reconfigure the router. Like, oh, that guest who came by accidentally reconfigured my router. Not accidentally, but they could if you don't change the admin password, because the defaults are usually stupid, like password or admin. It's just silly. So change that on the router. Another reason you might want to change it, and these are really sneaky attacks, is that there are malicious websites that will have links, embedded image references or something in their HTML to default router addresses with default usernames and passwords that compromise the router. So that's been occurring more and more. So there's the potential that someone on your network is web browsing and they end up on a malicious web page that reprograms your router while you don't know what's going on. But if you change the password, that's not an issue. And this is an important one just from a practical perspective. If you're at home and you configure the router for everybody, this happens to me, right? I go visit family or something and they're like, oh yeah, you do computers. Here, fix my router. So I go, okay, I go and I set it all up for them. Write down all the passwords for it on a piece of paper and tape it to the bottom of the router. And the reason for this is that people forget them because they rarely use them. I mean, how often do you have to enter the password to connect to a router? Once, the first time. After that, you don't do it again. And so this way, you write all that down on the bottom of it, and then 6 months or 12 months later, when you need it again, it's there, easy to find. And it's really not a security issue, because if you think of an attacker, well, the attacker could read the bottom of the router too. Yeah, but if the attacker is holding your router in their hand, they've already accomplished whatever it is they want it to do. So yeah, it's just something to think about. Okay, so summing up. Good enough security for Wi-Fi networks is pretty easy. You just use WPA2 with a pre-shared key, and you write your passwords on the bottom of the router, and everybody's happy, and it works. It isn't perfect, however, and allowing guests is always kind of problematic. That's the one major complaint I have about the design of security in Wi-Fi networks, is that dealing with guests is just not very good. It's not very well set up. That's all for now. Thanks.